whoa, and it's as if by magic everyone appears.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. I see one more person still in the waiting room, so I'll give them a second to join and then we shall kick things off. Happy Thursday, everyone. I think it's Thursday most places in the world, not everywhere. Thank you so much for joining us from wherever it is that you are. This is day 3 of the Mojaloop PI 19 online community meeting. This is essentially your day. This is the day when you get to hear pitches from potential work streams, and then you get to cast your vote. And your vote is essentially your say in the priorities that we should work on, in setting the priorities for this convening. What you will be voting for at some point this day is a list of work streams, and you should tell us which ones you feel are the highest priority. And I'll go into the voting in a second, but how we will split this day is into 3 main sections. Well, let's say 4. For those of you guys who have been here with us before, you're familiar with this process. For those of you guys who are new, this is for your benefit. We will start with Paul Macon leading a product council session where everyone will get an opportunity to hear a couple of words from each of some presentations from each of the various work streams that we're hoping to have going into the next PI. That's the first section. After that, we will take a break. So after Paul and the roadmap presentations, we will take a break. And then after the break or during the break, you will each have a chance to make a vote. So we will, at that point, we will have a slide deck with a link, as well as the link will be placed in the chat for you to vote. And each person gets 3 votes. You can apportion those votes as you wish. You can use all 3 votes for one work stream or apportion them equally to different places. That's entirely up to you. And then the top 3 work streams at the end of the voting, we will come back after the break and have workstream breakouts. The workstream breakouts will go on for an hour. After the workstream breakouts, we'll have another quick 10-minute break, and then we'll come up for report outs. So the various work streams will come back and give us their feedback or what the discussions have gone into. Summarize the discussions that they've had during the workstream breakouts. Then after that, we will go into our final session, which is the awards ceremony, where we recognize those in our community who have actively contributed. And celebrate those who are making a huge impact in our community, as well as crown this convening's trivia champion. So that is essentially the plan for the day. Get comfortable. I hope you're all ready for this one. I will pass it over to Mr. Paul Macon. Paul?
Thank you, Simeon. I'll just share my screen.
Sure.
In the traditional manner. And here I am, down here.
Yeah.
I'm going to keep this relatively short because it's far more interesting to hear from the workstream leads than it is from me. So I'll give a brief introduction and an update of where we've got so far. This agenda basically is a mirror of what Simeon just told you. So I want to really, first of all, tell you what's been happening over the last PI with regard to the product council. I'd say the last PI has, from my perspective, been slower than anticipated, for which I can only apologize. A combination of a vacation season. I was out with COVID for a couple of weeks, which was a bit of a killer for me, frankly, and just simply pressure of work. There's been just far too much to do, as I'm sure we all have. So we now have a clear plan, I think, for the next PI. This is the proposal, and I'm certainly very open for discussion around this. I'm planning that Product Council will have individual workstream meetings, one per month for each workstream. I think it's probably the most sensible way of doing it. We only managed a couple in the last PI, so I'd like to make it a lot more regular, sort of semi-formal. I've had a problem with timings. I've had somebody in Seattle who was telling me that they just couldn't attend the various meetings I've tried to schedule. And of course, if I time it so that it works for Seattle, then it won't work for Adelaide. So the option, one option is to have alternate timing. So one month we go for something that suits Seattle, the next month we go for something that suits Adelaide. What I'll try and do is look to see who is interested in joining each individual workstream meeting and try and schedule accordingly. But that's no trivial task. And I'd appreciate the help of participants in scheduling, and you're likely to see much more use of Doodle in that case, or something similar. In addition to that, we started to look at business-led focus groups, one per work stream. That is not for the various business interests to determine what should be developed. It's to try and look towards the future and look at the evolving needs for the work stream. So the output of what a business-led focus group is presented to the work stream meetings next time around to try and shape the future evolution. Separately from that, operator-led webinars, we need to improve our understanding of what the operators need. We've tried to schedule them. Again, scheduling has been my enemy in this. Trying to get something that suits everyone is a real challenge. But we need to understand real-world needs much better. Having said that, I recognize that if we just focus on what the operators want, then perhaps we might be in a position where we're just focusing on the short term. We need to balance that against the medium long-term vision as to what the industry as a whole, the payment sector as a whole is heading towards, and we need to support that. So it's a kind of a balance. But again, the output of the operator-led webinars gets fed into the various workstream meetings. That's the plan. If anyone knows a really good online scheduler, then I'd be very happy to use it, because scheduling is my biggest nightmare. Moving on. These are the candidate work streams that I want people to present on. We have 8, but actually there's only 7, because the first one, PISP or 3PPI, is going to effectively be paused, and Sam will explain why. We have Forex, which is an extraordinarily important work stream, as I'm sure you heard from the last couple of days. Infrastructure is there because we do need support. We need a better understanding of the infrastructure needs and what support is available to help meet those needs. And that is where potentially the not just the operators, but also people like Innocent and his focus on hackathons, etc., could be a real help in helping to shape those requirements. The new settlement models, this goes hand in hand with Forex for me, though actually it extends much further than that. It's again, this is moving with the industry requirement. We can't feasibly in the medium long term have a service which only operates one settlement model at a time. We need to be able to support multiple for different types of transaction, including Forex. And since it goes hand in hand with Forex, I've asked Michael to talk to that. Digital identity integration, this is going to be one that is going to rise up the priority list, I feel. We know, for example, that World Bank are very interested in supporting work around integration between identity payments and also the whole electronic cash transfer market, seeing it as a three-way integration, and we need to try and spark support for that. Fraud integration, Greg, I really want you to talk to that because it is obviously important. The regulators are moving towards making this a requirement over the next couple of years, probably. Merchant payments, this one kind of I think is extremely important. It kind of got downplayed a little because of essentially the people who were helping me drive that forward had other priorities. That Justice was very focused on fraud, and Lewis, as you all know, has now left the community. So that kind of slowed everything down. And VNext, we clearly need support for that. I haven't had confirmation from Pedro or Miguel that they're happy to talk about this, but here's a shout out to you guys. Perhaps you could give me 5 minutes on why the community should support VNext. That's the work streams we're going to consider. I'm not going to talk any further on these. I'm going to call for the individual workstream leads nominated here to actually perhaps talk for 5 minutes or so as to what support the community can give and how we can get the community involved. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and Sam, I'm really hoping you are ready to give me 5 minutes on why PISP is being paused for the moment.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, I'd like to give a pitch as well, even if we are pausing the general work. Yeah, probably wouldn't need 5 minutes, but let me share my screen quickly. Paul, once you see it, if you can confirm, I'll proceed.
There you go. Go for it.
Yeah, so yesterday we discussed where we are with Mojaloop 3PPI. I think the small version, the brief version, TLDR version, is that third party from the implementation side is done, but we're looking forward to adoption. So we need adopters, and obviously many of our components, when faced with real world implications, had to be upgraded, customized, changed, fixed, things like that. So that is, I think, at this stage, a generic process that TPPI needs to go through as well. But the good news is that it is ready for that. It's ready for the big stage and for adoption and yeah, production readiness. So the only thing we are looking for is FSPs in markets such as Myanmar or in other places who are willing to try out third-party services so that we can refine if needed and make sure that it works in real world. So far, we've mentioned that we have a standard version of the API. It is bundled with Mojaloop releases out of the box. The documentation is there. The last step here, we put a pause. We had to put a pause on developing an adapter for the Google standard payments GSP API because the API is going through changes, and there is a draft version for a newer version of the API, which in fact is more aligned with the patterns that Mojaloop follows. So that is the reason why we had to put it on hold, so that a standard version for that is published, and then the workstream picks up from there. So following that, these are the few things I was thinking of for this upcoming PI. Is the first two are more of a call to adopters and implementers, saying if you are an FSP or if you are involved with an FSP or a third-party implementer who wants to try out Mojaloop's third-party functionality, that would be great. It would be great to try out. I think our core team and Google and others would like to support you on that and see where changes are needed, or if it works for you, great. So, but that would need some kind of connectors. that need to be developed as part of the payment manager or the interfacing with the SDK, the third-party scheme adapters. Right now, it works with a combination of the testing toolkit. The third-party and scheme adapters provide the responses needed for end-to-end demos, but having a real core backend or a third-party backend would help validate this end-to-end. And then, of course, we are looking at some hackathons, third-party or PSP hackathons on the horizon. We want to make sure that the third-party functionality is ready for that. I don't know if there is a full-time or a work stream on this for this PI, like for a few weeks. We don't know when we'll restart, but hopefully soon. But if there is a hackathon happening and if there are issues or if support is needed, if the work stream is active, I think they'll take that up. Even outside of the work stream, the core team and Google, I think, can offer support based on bandwidth and other constraints. But the biggest thing might be that we do have the implementation, but there was a demo that was made with the Flutter app a while ago. But that's outdated, very outdated. It was, I think, about 3 years ago that was done, 2 to 3 years ago. So if we want to invest anything in this PI, it would be great to focus our energies on demo because as we saw earlier, we have a Mojaloop third-party functionality. It would be great to showcase that to adopters to show how it works and for them to show to other people. So any energy we have in this PI, we may be able to, it would be good to spend it on a demo enhancements and making sure an end-to-end demo works. We already have end-to-end tests that work. We have a demo on Mojaloop YouTube on that. So feel free to look at the PDF deck uploaded to GitHub and find the links there. There's also, I think, a requirement for a third-party dev portal or Sandbox that's been talked about. At this stage, unless there are any additional features provided on top of existing Mojaloop, even any Mojaloop deployment that deploys default Mojaloop with third-party services enabled should be able to provide the APIs and the services needed. It's just that we may need, in some cases, to provide a dev portals or user interface to help with hackathons or more advanced use cases. So these are things. Mostly, we need a good demo to build on what was done so far and support hackathons. The other two connectors are more for ensuring that the third-party functionality implemented works in real world. Michael and JJ have many of the use cases. I think talked about alternate mechanisms of authorizations, potentially bulk, but I think these are still in consideration. I think Matt Miller, JJ, and Michael mentioned yesterday that those need further discussions. So we'll continue that, but I think these are things we can do in the coming few weeks. Thanks, Paul.
Perfect. Thank you, Sam. That was great. The next one on my list was foreign exchange. So I'm going to hand over to Michael and ask him to tout the foreign exchange worksheet.
Sad to say, I forgot to don my ticket touts kit for today, but you will have to take me as I am, I'm afraid. Currency conversion in Mojaloop systems. So we talked about it earlier. What do we want to do? Well, first of all, we want support for bulk and payment versus payment currency purchases in Mojaloop. Bulk, people can buy as much as they want of a particular foreign currency, DFSPs, I mean, not people. Payment versus payment is the per transfer, low cost support for currency conversion as part of a transfer. We want to implement this via direct interactions between DFSPs and foreign exchange providers, possibly multiple foreign exchange providers in a single Mojaloop scheme. And we also want, for this purpose in particular, but probably also in general, to be able to get deterministic outcomes for multi-component transactions. That is to say, if a transfer includes a foreign exchange conversion, either both the conversion and the transfer should succeed, or both of them should fail. But it should not be possible for one of the components to succeed and the other one to fail. So that's really our objectives. What do we need to do in order to reach those objectives? Well, first of all, we need to implement the API changes. They've been defined, they've been reviewed, they are more or less ready to go. If anyone wants to look at the document and comment on it, they will be most welcome to do so. It's available on our GitHub page, or you can contact me directly and ask for a copy, and I'd be very happy to send it to you, and also to go through the thinking behind it if anyone is interested. We need to add service discovery for foreign exchange providers. Now, that's something which we have added as an endpoint as part of the PISP, third-party interface, but we need to extend it so that DFSPs can ask the switch what institutions are offering currency conversion in their switch. We need to add some handlers for the new foreign exchange transfers, the new currency conversion transfers. We'll need a quotes handler, we'll need a prepare handler, and we'll need a commit or fulfill handler for those, because we have different endpoints for currency conversion. Those handlers, they will be essentially analogous to the handlers we already have for transfers, but nevertheless, we will need to construct them and add them to the switch code. And we will also need to add dependency checking to the commit handlers for transfers and for foreign exchange transfers. Pardon me. And we'll need to add, obviously, tests and testing toolkit support so that we can simulate these things happening correctly. So those are the things that we need to do. The resources we need are a services endpoint, as I've already said, an FX version of the quotes endpoint, and an FX version of the transfers endpoint. So 3 new sets of endpoints for the FX, for the foreign exchange API. There will be some changes we want to the FSP IOP API. They are changes that we think will be non-breaking because they will all be optional. To first of all, to be able to receive a list of currencies in which a payee's account can receive by an addition to the put parties call in the FSP IOP API. To change the data model for post quotes and put quotes to allow the debtor DFSP to specify that it wants the creditor DFSP to undertake currency conversion or vice versa. And the transaction object should be extended to include that information as part of the agreed terms of the transfer. This is a brief schematic of how we think, well, sorry, I'll rephrase that, how I think the dependency check might work. I will obviously be sending a copy of the, or putting a copy of this presentation, so people who want to check it and take a look and comment on it can do so. But essentially it says the confirmation is in 2 parts. The foreign exchange transfer, if it succeeds, is added to a watch queue for the transfer itself, and that waits for the transfer fulfill event, which happens below that line. Then if that, if there is an associated transfer for the transfer part of it, then we will either succeed or fail the foreign exchange conversion. So that ensures that either both of the parts of the transfer will succeed or both parts will fail. So that's a little bit of work on part of that. So apart from that, does anyone have any questions?
I might ask, what is the best way of beginning the collaboration? on this? So is it through some form of work, as we've talked about, a workstream meeting? Talk about
Yes.
this. Is that the best way, or
Yep.
just yeah? Okay, fine.
Yep, I think a
So-
workstream meeting.
Yeah.
If I could jump in too quickly,
Sure.
this is a pretty complex subject. I was
Yeah.
able to follow your presentation, and it looks like there's a opportunity in a couple of places to think about the cryptographic interlocks, as well as the other forms of guarantees that are unique to Mojaloop, but also to think about what happens when if we go down this path with Interledger, which looks pretty promising. What implications does that have? Those are more for outlining the areas of the problem over time, but then picking off what can we do straight ahead that doesn't forestall us doing those things, but that gets quick progress on the core of the FX. Because it seems like this is a pretty big problem. There's a lot of work that needs doing, but taking the minimum viable product approach, we could get something narrowly through this relatively quickly to demonstrate the core concepts. But if we did this without demonstrating the core parts, that is the cryptographic interlocks or the ability to do the proper quotation cycle, I don't know that we've really proved much at that point. So it's unfortunately kind of a big first step. So I agree that I think a workshop format for this would be good, starting with really walking through the design at present, not so much to debate it as to factor it into parts that can be worked on. There's always opportunity to look at those things that don't feel like they fit well and revisit. But I think that getting everyone else's head in this at the same level that yours is would be super helpful.
Sure.
And I'm sorry, but I don't have any solution for the time zone problem, other than to ask one of us, either in Adelaide or in Seattle, to go somewhere else during the workshop.
We can wait for continental drift, I think, to move.
I'll volunteer to go to Adelaide, or
Johnny,
indeed Seattle.
I was going to make a recommendation, however, was that we be prepared to do some serious work on the ground in Zanzibar, where we will all be together.
Yeah,
and that does unfortunately mean some time zone gymnastics to get that first workshop together, where we can really seriously walk through the design and try to take a crack at factoring. I don't know, Michael, how you react to that.
No, that sounds like a great idea. One comment I'd like to make on the idea of how this might play into our interest in cross-network providers is that this model does, as it were, out of the box, support a situation where a DFSP receives a request for a transfer in, as it were, any currency whatsoever, because we're now allowing the DFSP, the payee DFSP, to obtain currency conversion cover for a transfer, at least in principle, in whatever currency it comes in. That should be able just to happen without the necessity for the sending party on the other side of the cross-network provider to manage currency conversion for themselves. And I think, as we've said, I think several times before, it's more likely that currency conversion to a relatively underused currency will be available at reasonable cost in the target jurisdiction than it is that it will be available at reasonable cost in the source jurisdiction. So if you're talking about converting, let's say, to Rwandan francs or other small currencies, when I say small currencies, you understand, I'm not intending to disparage them in any way relative to the US dollar. Exactly. It's more likely that you'll be able to get those conversions at reasonable cost in Rwanda than it is that you will be able to get them at a reasonable cost in Seattle, let's say.
Quite. Yes. Okay, well, anything else, Michael, you wanted to add to that?
Nothing else from me, apart from to say, yes, let me take as an action then to try and set up a workshop or a work stream meeting to kick this process off, and as Miller says, start the process of analysing and factoring what we intend to do.
Okay. I'll work with you on that, Michael, because I need to make sure that it's sort of in some form of alignment with the other work stream.
Sure.
Okay, cool. Thank you. The next item on my list was infrastructure, and we had Tom and David Fry talking yesterday. I would ask one or both of them to present serially or in parallel. Perhaps I can hand it over to Tom to begin with.
Sure. I don't have too much to add, just to give a little bit of context back, or a little bit more context than perhaps I was able to do yesterday. And we're going to try this. We're going to try sharing the screen again, and hopefully we can get my slides up. Let me see how we go here. I'm hoping you can see the 4 columns.
Yep.
So again, just to recap, this work stream was sort of announced in Arusha, and then we did what we're going to do today. I guess we voted on the work streams, and then we did a huddle for an hour, and then I took the action item to try and take a swag, a first cut at what I was hearing, and that's what you're looking at in this slide deck. And there's a little bit more to it, and there's a couple of other important things that I'll just mention. But I've also, spent 3 months thinking about this and talking to people as well, and I think the very first thing that we could conclude is that we don't need, well, sorry, let's go back one step. What are we trying to achieve? I actually think that we're trying to achieve 2 or 3 things. One is that we are, per the left-hand column, we're trying to actually make it very, very easy for people who don't have a lot of expertise with cloud native applications, Kubernetes, containers, to actually try out and get some context of what Mojaloop actually offers them. And so having something you can get up in a half an hour, and then you point the testing toolkit to it, you point the VJ's mobile simulators, and you watch phones actually transfer money from one to another, get a quote, and actually have the balance actually, have the funds turn from one phone to the other. So it's really, it's access. Level 1 is all about access, and if you like, marketing and demo. Level 4, as we have it here, and I'm going to propose that we don't need 4 levels anymore, but level 4 is trying to achieve the, how do we make somebody who's actually implementing this in anger, who's committed to it, how do we make them really, really productive? And I won't say too much about that because I'll leave that to David. Obviously, this is his baby. When we were talking in between, in Arusha and in between, we also had this second and third levels, somewhat, I think, driven by discussions around the Rwandan sandbox. And some of the comments that David made, and some comments that Michael made in subsequent meetings. Can we, and sorry, there's one other little bit of history for people that I think is really informing even the nomenclature here. I think the nomenclature of Sandbox is actually coming from what Lewis did with the OSS Sandbox in Amazon, making a pre-deployed environment available, and of course the Rwandan Sandbox as well for testing things, and I guess the Bits of Works project and a couple of others. So I think our first goal is to actually talk about what the goals are. I've outlined level 1 and the demo and the production I think that's a given. The questions I think we need to ask are, do we need the things in level 2 and level 3? And if so, do we need a separate Sandbox toolkit, or should they be part of the IAC or part of Miniloop? Or should they be something separate again? Because as you're going from left to right here, you're also talking about a lot more resources, as well as a lot more understanding, and therefore a lot more cost and a lot more moving parts. So I think for the next 3 months, this is just my opinion, and I'll hand it over to David in a minute. I think we need to do a couple of things. I think we need to actually talk about and get a really concrete agreement on the purposes of the things and the list of things that should be in level 2 or 3. And then we need to figure out whether level 2 and 3 need to go away or whether they just need to coalesce. And then if they don't go away, how do they get implemented and who owns them and how can they be built? I think that's really the job. So I don't know if you're there, David, and you want to say a few things, or is that? No, not hearing anything. So
sorry, I'm just talking to mute.
You're talking to mute. All right, David.
So I think it's a good framing. I have some nitpicking that I would do with the categorization. And basically the first thing is, I think level 4 in your diagram, while good for kind of filling out the whole list of goals or purposes for infrastructure, I think we should remove it from our further discussions, because even the IAC that has been developed, we're explicitly saying that it's not production ready, right? It might form the basis of somebody of code that somebody would use to go to production, but we're on purpose saying that all we're doing is up to level 3. So while this diagram here on the screen is good for full discussion, I think in our work stream we're going to leave level 4 out of the picture, and we're just going to discuss levels 1, 2, and 3. And then my second comment would be, in terms of the level 2 and level 3, I think we do need to have some further group discussion about what are we actually trying to achieve with level 2. The level 2 seems to me to be like a hackathon type of purpose, and level 3 I think is what the IAC that you've mentioned before, that it's my baby, or it's not my baby, but it's definitely something I put a lot of time into and needs more community involvement to flesh out. That is for running a countrywide POC, and that is the end of the spectrum, right? So I think that part is pretty well defined, and it needs to have community development effort put into it in order to fully flesh it out, no doubt. And then the one that I think we really need to talk about is, what are we trying to do with hackathon type environments? What pieces go into it? What are the requirements for that? I think that's the biggest question mark in my mind that requires more definition.
Yeah, cool. Thanks. No argument. That's great. That's actually moving on. I think you're clarifying what I said. We need to actually figure out what it is that we're trying to achieve, and then which ones. I think you've simplified things already there, David, by saying, well, we probably don't need level 4. So okay, that's great. But I hope everybody else listening is actually getting the idea that what we're trying to do is to facilitate using the technology that we're building. So infrastructure is just about enabling the users and the use case at whatever level that people are actually at. So we've got all the conversations about the code. We've got all the conversations about the the application and payments and the problem space. This topic is how to make that most conveniently and most accessible to the most people for the right level. And I'll leave it there. Hopefully that's clear, and hopefully that's indicating the importance of what we're trying to do here.
I've got a couple of comments that I think might help us resolve a thread through this. I see really two different uses here, although we have three levels that we're looking at. There really are four, but there's really two that I think we could focus on. And one has the focus of getting somebody from nothing to running as fast as possible, which is really the level one combination of level 1 and level 2, depending on who you are, if you're an account holding institution or a developer or a fintech. But theoretically, it's, I just need to get started. How do I get this thing up and running so that I can start testing on my own system and doing small amounts of development integration? But then there's a step beyond that, which is really not so much about infrastructure as code as it is about continuous integration and continuous deployment. That's the thing that's getting us in trouble. We're not actually, and Tom, I know this is a thing that you've been harping on as well. We're not really using Kubernetes the way it was intended. That if we go through a process with integration to an operating environment, I'm speaking now for example, like they're developing one in Rwanda, the Myanmar situation, and some of the others, that they need the ability to take current code, spin the system up in their sandbox environment and get running with it quickly, and not to be treating some of the inputs quite as precious as we do now. There has to be a way to stay on the tip that's relatively easy to do. And I know IAC is the key to making that work, but I don't really think it's quite to that point yet. It still feels like you climb a mountain, and when you get there, you plant a flag and you wait, and you really aren't that eager to climb the mountain again. It would be way better to get to a point where it's a steady state of choices made around what to integrate, but that there's a steady cadence of upgrading to latest stuff, and that IAC enables that. Miniloop is a different version of that, which is that I can start from nothing and get something running, and I can do that so easily that there's really no point in modifying what I have. I just start over. I can just spin up whatever new thing I need. I'm going to work a patch on something. I can spin it up and test it. I can tear it down. Then I can spin up the next thing, get back on tip and do some work there. It does seem like those are combination of use of the Kubernetes environment in different ways. I mean, I tend to agree that the full production isn't so much a thing that we can deliver, but we could certainly deliver templates or ideas about how one integrates into that environment that builds on the cadence approach to the sandbox, which I guess would be a combination of level 2 and 3. That's some initial thoughts. It seems like we need to really think about what we're delivering out the end, and so we know that we've achieved that.
Yeah, thanks, Miller. I think, a couple of comments about the production and the level 3, the sandbox, the Myanmar experience, for instance. And we have obviously Works here who can talk about that experience from their own point of view. I think the main reason for leaving production out is because we're not making any production guarantees, right? If somebody's going to use this, they have to ensure that it fits their production needs, which are going to be case by case, specific to that implementation. So the level 3, the POC, I believe, does provide a lot of suggestions on how to move forward, but it doesn't provide all the suggestions, right? So we do approximate what you're describing in terms of giving some suggestions about how they would secure a production environment, but we're not saying that this is a production environment, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, but that's the point I'm trying to make, is that you can't hand this off, a Miniloop or a level 2 sandbox, to generate a POC and then say, okay, now you just have to take it to production, because the gap is too great.
Yeah.
And so some
Yeah.
guidance in thinking about how do you build a production CI/CD pipeline, including a pre-production sandbox and a conversion strategy that allows you to flip into production. How does that work? We demonstrated that years ago when we actually started using Kubernetes, that we could shoot a server and it would come back up again. We show how self-healing works, and we could show how zero downtime upgrades work. We can't do that today. We need to demonstrate that, exactly demonstrate. This is exactly how it works. And then someone can say, okay, now I need to put my own stuff in that. But there isn't any guidance in place for doing that. And there's no baseline to start from. That's where I think we're looking at for level 4. Perhaps I'm not saying something different than you are, but the focus perhaps is different.
Yeah, and we did some effort around that, but I think I totally agree that needs to be more work needs to go into it. And it has to be a little bit better documented. But obviously, it's not mini loop to production. We're talking about actual multi-node clusters, and the way that you would react to failure scenarios is somewhat dependent on the type of deployment that you have. So it's not one size fits all, but I would love to see more effort put into that space to give more Mojaloop recommendations on how production would actually be deployed. But just to be clear, right now with the work that's gone into the IAC and what's been deployed in AWS for the Myanmar project, allows you to quickly deploy a switch. And if you're, like you were saying, in a development environment that you just want to destroy it and bring it back up with the newest versions, that's a pretty easy thing to accomplish right now. And I also, with the use of payment managers on the periphery, that isolates the DFSPs from the actual switch having changes or what have you. So there's a lot of things that we can talk about with the current version of IAC that will allow us to address a lot of the things that you mentioned. But before we finish here, the level 2, the hackathon, or I'm calling it the hackathon environment. We have to decide in these discussions that come up in the workstream, do we really need a switch? And for instance, could we use the TTK in order to support all the use cases? Because I think that the real distinction between 2 and 3 is that 2, we don't have any DFSPs. We have fintechs that are participating. That's the audience that's described there. Whereas the account holding institutions is the level in the level 3. There we're actually needing to have a switch in order to be useful as a demo environment. So I think that's the distinction. And if we look at 2, we want to come up with solutions that allow us to react to needing a hackathon environment quickly. And if we can not use a switch, I think, and we have a very lightweight solution that will support the use cases for hackathons and the other envisioned purposes for level 2, then I think we have a better arrow to use in those types of use cases.
Yeah, the level 2 using the TTK is a very good idea, and being able to have that environment, that means that when you run a hackathon, you can make the decision. You either want to switch or you don't. So it's not that level 2 is for fintechs and level 3 is for account holding institutions. It's that there is a TTK based environment that can support a large part of tire kicking and hackathon style work. And how you do that would be what you're calling level 2. It's a set of practices and documentation around the use of the TTK to fully simulate a switch environment. It needs to support PISP as well as the standard interfaces. Then the level 3 environment is where you really do have a running switch in a sandbox to support something that's beyond what could be supported by the TTK. So those two things are complementary. I agree with you that we might want to focus level 2 on just the simulation environment and not on the use of the full thing, because there's not a lot of difference otherwise between 2 and 3 if they're both using switches.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of security implications with level 3 because you do have account holding institutions that are connecting their environments to it. And so I think that is the complexity that level 3 brings, that you don't have to worry about really in level 2.
No, that makes sense. And of course, the point being that 1, 2, 3 all look like relatively modest hardware commitments. 1 and 2 being largely local, possibly server, but 3 being cloud, but it's a very small footprint. And 4 is unknown because it's production and you have no idea what's going to really need to be assembled. So it does seem like there's a set of work that ought to be specified, but it really ought to be pulled through a set of outcomes that we're seeking, and not so much where are we now and how could we make it better, but really look at those outcomes. So specify specifically, if you are done with level 2, what could you do? What would the TTK environment, the simulation environment, allow you to do, and demonstrate that you can do those things. Likewise, in level 3, what can I do in a simple cloud environment? Very much like I would have had in level 1, but now in a cloud environment and with appropriate security connection points for actual account holding institutions in a non-production environment with fake customers. Once we've got those fairly complementary outcomes defined, we've got a lot of resources already built that I think the gap will be clear. So what needs to be closed?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was saying. We want to define what it is that we want to use these things for. But I thought it's worth mentioning Tenexio in Mojaloop Help, and then I'm sure David's had conversations with him as I have. And I think it's a gentleman from France. I was on a Zoom session with him, and he went from using Miniloop, and we got him up and running, and he's all happy, and that was great. And then 2 weeks, and he went quiet, and I went, oh, okay, fine. He either lost interest or whatever. Then the next post I see is he's actually running IAC, and he's actually trying to get the whole shebang up and running. And I thought, well, there is exactly one scenario of what we want to do, is we want to take somebody from kicking the tires through to, okay, I need more expertise, and now I need some different outcomes, and I need something that's much more real world. I thought that, you know, maybe we could put our outcomes just as a set of scenarios, whether they're hackathons, whether they're ways that a government will actually progress through doing a countrywide switch or whatever. And I thought that might inform what we actually want in terms of the sandboxes.
Yeah, I'm working with Najee, who's the Tunixio, who's behind Tunixio, and
yeah,
he and we just got GitLab running on the latest Bootstrap, and what I mentioned yesterday about polishing up and doing some releases has been driven quite a bit from his needs. So we're just getting the switch running on his AWS account. So I think, and what I mentioned about getting documentation polished, I was referring to this effort. So I think I totally agree. I think it would be a great not a use case, but an example of that trajectory that you're talking about, from Miniloop to actually getting a switch up and running.
Yeah. So I guess we're actually for the last 10 minutes, we've been doing what the Workstream job is.
Yes.
To actually define what it, but anyway, hopefully that gives everybody a good feel for what we've got to do and the unit of work in front of us.
I think that's the point. It's not to do all of the work, but to do enough here that we've got some clear idea of what the work stream's for. And I think that redefining these Miniloop, ML Sandbox Medium, so redefining those labels so that we have a clear outcome that we're looking for, that's a huge step forward.
So can we bring this to an end for now, please? Thank you. It's been an extremely useful and interesting discussion. But Tom, as you said, we should really focus on the Workstream session afterwards, hoping that people will vote for infrastructure, because I think it's clear that it would benefit from significant community input. So thank you very much. The next one is settlement models. So I'm going to pass over to Michael now to talk about settlement models.
Thank you very much.
And stopping talking about PISPs on the chat. Thank you.
Why do you want to stop me talking about PISPs?
Try and do both at once. Come on.
Yeah, and why not? Right. Okay. So settlement version 2. We didn't talk about that in the presentations this convening, but we did mention it several times. So what do we want to do? Well, we want to extend the existing settlement model so that we can define the types of transfer which are settled according to the model. Transfers like this are settled by this model, so that we can split out different kinds of transfers and say this settlement model settles these kinds of transfers. We also want to be able to define how the transfers which are settled by the model are deterministically assigned to settlement batches by time period or by other characteristics of the transfer. And we've had a number of problems, as I think as most people know, in the past, because at present it's not possible to accurately assign transfers to a particular settlement window. And that's caused all kinds of problems, reconciliation and settlement problems for participants. Second, we want to be able to record ledger movements according to the ledger defined in the settlement model. So what we want to be able to do is not only to say types of transfer are settled like this, but also to have different ledgers for those different settlement models, and that includes both position ledgers and settled funds ledgers. So that means that, for instance, the liquidity check will be a liquidity check against the settlement account, which is defined for that settlement model. So we will be able, for instance, to do things like where we are doing very large batch transfers, we can hypothecate settlement for that, or settlement liquidity cover for that transfer, so that we get round the potential problem we have at the moment, that where we're trying to do a very large transfer, it's possible that some of the transfers might not succeed because liquidity cover isn't available. So that's an example of the sorts of things that we might be able to do. Then we want to be able to settle by settlement batches, i.e. deterministically assigned batches, not settlement windows. So that is a rough statement of what I think we want to be able to do. So in order to do that, what do we need to change? Well, first of all, we need to extend the settlement model from where it currently is. We need to extend the definition and the way it's stored and persisted in the database. We need to change the admin API to accommodate the new structures, and we will need to change the business operations framework eventually to support the new functions, though those second two would not be necessary, I think, for an MVP for Settlement v2. We also need to create ledgers dynamically when settlement models are saved, because one of the implications of this is that if I were to define a new settlement model while a scheme is running, I would want to be able to generate the ledgers appropriate to that settlement model for each participant in the scheme without having to stop the thing. I just want them to turn up so that they can be used. At the moment, I think, as people generally know, ledgers are set up for participants when the scheme is set up. So this is something that will have to be much more dynamic than that. Second, we want to be able to assign a transfer to a ledger. At the moment, ledger assignment is fixed in the switch. There's just a single ledger to which transfers are assigned and against which settlement funds are measured. That will need to become variable. It will need to be we need to be assigned for each transfer as it comes in. That doesn't necessarily need, well, we would hope, to be a difficult or time-consuming process, but it will need to be variable. Now, second, or third rather, we'll need to assign a transfer to a batch. And that means we need to replace the existing assignment code in the switch. Now, all it does in the switch at the moment is it just says, assign this transfer to the current settlement window. We will need to change that so that for any given transfer, we apply the batch definition rule for that type of transfer, and then store the information relating to that transfer in that particular batch. And that will give us deterministic assignment of transfers to batches. We also therefore need to be able to create settlement batches dynamically. Depending on how those things are set up, we will need the ability to create new settlement batches ad hoc as we go along, and that will need to happen automatically. We also need, I think, still to support manual closure of a batch. So in a case where, for instance, there is a problem, it should be possible to close a batch to which that transfer or those transfers belong, and to continue storing other transfers in a different batch, just so that we can make sure that we minimize the number of transfers that have to be held up from settlement due to some known problem. So we think the simple thing there is that a batch is manually closed by renaming it. We will need, I think, to change the admin API and the business operations framework to enable administrators to see which batch is available and to close it manually. We will then need to modify the settlement process itself to allow settlement contents to be selected by batch, and also to allow renaming in the same way as for manual closure, because one of the things about this deterministic assignment of transfers to windows is the thing that you lose as a consequence of that is the ability to say, I will only settle a window if it has already been closed, and therefore no further transfers can be assigned to it. The downside of a deterministic assignment of transfers to batches is that it will be, you will need to have some way of saying what happens if for some reason a transfer turns up late which should have gone into a batch which is in fact already being settled. Shouldn't happen, I know, but again we need to have confidence that no transfers can be lost as part of that process. So this is really, I want to talk a little bit about the processes by which we get from the code that actually does the assignment of transfers to particular settlement models and of transfers to batches to where we eventually want to be on this. So at the first level, we have the executable code itself, which we expect to be a procedure with a standard name, which just gets called from as part of the preparation stage and as part of the fulfillment stage. Second, we want stored definitions, i.e. some way of storing the definition of how to assign a transfer to a settlement model. And those stored definitions will produce executable code via a deterministic process. Third, there'll be a user interface which will enable an administrator to create and modify stored definitions which will result in executable code, changes to the executable code. Now, ease of definition, it's easiest at the user interface. The idea is that the user interface ought to be something that any administrator who understands the concepts behind the system could manipulate. The hardest, of course, is to make direct changes to the executable code, which you would need to be a developer in order to do. However, we don't expect this to be something that would change very often. So it may be that for simplicity's sake, we would just, at least in the first instance, set up the executable code. And as long as we set it up in a standard way, it should be possible later on to add the other layers that will produce it. On the other hand, simplicity of implementation is easiest if you only have to worry about the executable code. It gets progressively more complex and difficult as you have to define what the stored definitions would look like and design the user interface to enable those stored definitions to be set up by non-technical users. So that's just we need to think about this sort of slide. But I'm expecting that for an MVP of Settlement v2, we only need to do step one, i.e. produce executable code. And as long as it's in a standard form, that should be fine. We can add to it later. So that's all I have to say, except that for the later use of Mojaloop and for wider adoption, we have to fix this, I think. I mean, we're coming up again and again against problems which are generated by the fact that the settlement model we currently use is not fit for purpose. We really need to do something about this, and we need to do something about it fast, if only because the work that we're currently doing, which we talked about yesterday, for instance, on remittances from outside the system, we will definitely need to be able to manage those transfers in a different way, to manage and settle them in a different way from the way we do transfers generated inside the system. Nia, I can see you have your hand up. Would you like to ask me a question?
Thank you, Michael. Yes, I do. This is very exciting, right? As you can imagine, from our team, we're all watching how this could be applicable, right, to what we're doing, not only for WinePay but also for the other POC that we're working together. As you can imagine, Michael. One question I wanted to clarify, right? The settlement type. Using a settlement model specifically tied to this type, it's very clear. I also wanted to raise the need that we had, not currently now, but I think in the future we may have multiple settlement banks using the same model, right? So we have the same settlement type using the same settlement model, but going to settlement different settlement banks. In this design, in this model that you're thinking, are you also planning for that eventual need in a particular installation?
Well, it's certainly the case that we would expect. Sorry, I want to go directly to your question, which is about different settlement banks, but the same settlement model. Now, it's certainly the case at the moment that we could support different settlement banks via the same settlement model, because the definition and the creation of the instructions to those banks to execute a settlement is not part of the core system itself, and that was deliberate on our part. We've talked about it a number of times in the past and said it would be too complicated to provide a generalized way of doing this. Now, I suspect for a number of reasons that, as you imply, we will need to think about ways in which we might bring that further into the Mojaloop product itself, so that we can do much more about providing support for people to do configuration of actual settlement instructions as part of the central product itself. However, I deliberately excluded that from consideration in this because what I want to say is this is urgent stuff. We need to do it now. Does that answer your question?
Yes, Michael, thank you.
Okay.
Yep.
Miller, you have your hand up. It's very exciting, all this hand up stuff, isn't it?
Oh, just why not? So I think fundamentally what we're looking at is that the settlement process, however it's modeled, starts with a pool of liquidity that can be used to collateralize transfers. And the assignment of a particular transfer to a particular pool of liquidity is a combination of configuration choice in the scheme, which is very slow moving, and the admission of participants to those various collateral pools, and the characteristics of the transfer that's being brought in. So if we lay aside FX for a moment because it's complicated, and look at the simple transfers, we have at least two different kinds of things we have to deal with that flow from the transfer itself. One of them is settling a principal between the two institutions. And if they don't both join the same collateral pool, then the transfer cannot be cleared. It's very simple. In that case, you either find a pool that they're both members of and that meets the configuration choices for the scheme, or you have to reject the transfer. In the case where you have offline things like interchange fees that are being handled by the scheme that are also off transaction but driven by transactions, there's a set of configuration around how that's collateralized. In the case, it's probably generally collateralized by credit. You send out bills, but you don't expect those to be collateralized directly in real time with real money. So then it starts to get hard when you get beyond that and you talk about FX and the things you started to raise this week.
Mhm.
Ultimately, though, I don't see any functional difference between batches and windows, except that batches aren't as flexible. When we talk about windows, we can say that it is a window into a collateral pool. When you show up to clear a transfer, you find a window onto the collateral pool to which both of them are configured to use. Both of the facilitating institutions are joined to and are configured to use. And there could be more than one. So you do have to have rules for how you select that. But once you've done that, that window stays open for whatever the settlement period for that collateral pool is. So if you have two different settlement banks, you have two different collateral pools. That's already more complicated than you'd like, but at least if there's a reason for it, you have that. And you have one window open on each one. You have to decide which window you're going to join, and there can be a set of configuration and rules around that. When you start getting into batches, all you're doing is you're throwing stuff into a batch, and then you have to decide later how you're going to reassign those to actual settlement practice. By doing it up front using windows, you've made that assumption up front. You've essentially assigned the transfers as a condition of accepting for clearing into an open settlement window that allows you to then process them automatically later and disconnectedly. It's important that we recognize that settlement runs on its own cadence, independent of the clearing process itself. And I know that FX, this gets complicated because of the spot rate changes during the day that Mawali has pointed out to us. And so some modeling does have to go on there. But I think fundamentally we have to get back to what is it we're actually doing. We're collateralizing the real-time clearing of transfers, which means that collateral pool has to be joined by both parties. And there has to be an ability for it to run independently once the transaction is cleared. And so, and that means that there's very little variability between the point at which you admit the transfer into the system and the point at which you commit it. You could say, I'm going to do nothing until I commit. I'm just going to make the assumption that this is available, look at the positions, but those positions are held on each liquidity pool separately. So if I have two different liquidity pools, two different settlement banks, then I have two different positions that I have to manage. And so all of that should be looked at through that lens of efficiency, but also within the core design principles for the separation of settlement from clearing. So I think workshopping first that notion that the models are in service of this other goal, not the thing. Then how do we accomplish these different use cases? How can these different use cases be supported by at least the most cohesive settlement collection of settlement models that we have? I'm not sure we're quite ready to get to code versus declarative design. To me, what we had for ALS, for example, was quite good. It said, we don't know how those ID systems work. We know what we need from them. And so we define that and we allow you to write custom code with no configuration layer in between for the individual ID systems. We're not trying to anticipate what they all look like. We're saying, here's what we need from them. We can do a similar thing here and probably move quite quickly. And then later stages, perhaps you'll find some declarative overlay that simplifies, but I suspect that's just complication right now. So getting back to basics, looking at what the actual settlement practices is, and then from that coming forward to a gap analysis of where we are, where we need to be. Mm-hmm. But I think you should be able to move quite quickly with with a Workstream environment with that kind of structure on it. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you. I mean, I should say that this model came out of workshopping with Mawali in particular, who set up a number of who originated a number of the requirements this is intended to answer. But that's not, of course, to say that that it wouldn't be valuable to workshop again with different participants and make sure that we really are achieving wide enough coverage. One comment that I would like to make about windows and batches is that I don't think from a settlement point of view there is any difference, as you rightly say. A window onto a collateral pool and a batch that looks at components of a collateral pool, in my mind at least, come to the same thing. From the liquidity cover point of view, at least, and we're always saying that no matter which batch or which window we assign a transfer to, it will always be a portion of the overall collateral pool, and we have made sure that it won't be possible for that collateral to be used twice in different batches or different windows. Now, I mean, I think it's not the time now to go into the reasons why we went for a batch rather than window view, but I'd be happy to pick that up again in the workshop. I'm conscious also of the fact that poor Pedro has had his hand up for so long, his arm must be tired. Pedro.
Also, we have already run out of time. We've only done 4 models, so 4 work streams. So please, Pedro, can we keep this short? I can't hear you, Pedro.
You're muted for, well, sorry, actually you're not muted, but we can't hear you.
You're not muted.
That's
better.
Yeah,
Oh,
we
yeah.
hear you now.
Sorry. Too many microphones connected at the system. Well, first, good presentation, Michael. And first point is regarding the ability to have multiple models that need configuration. I know we discussed this plenty of times during the reference architecture meetings, but it's a good time to pass this point to the community. This is a very good example for vNext platform configuration mechanism that will allow operators to configure the functionality without changing the code or doing redeployments. And this will allow them also to do these changes in a secure, authorized mechanism that is also audited. So basically, this will allow them to change system parameters, change the way the system works in a secure and audited fashion. This is an important mechanism for big systems like ours. The second point is, I'm going to repeat myself. This is the usual question about, are these new developments and new features something that we have to do right now, or can we plan this for vNext and benefit from all of the benefits that vNext will bring in terms of authorization, security, and platform configuration, for example, and also its architecture and the way it interconnects. And again, I'll probably ask these questions to all of the work streams, because I do think that we now have this reference architecture that allows us to frame these product development decisions in this fashion. Is it a tactical decision, i.e. must we really develop this right now for valid reasons, or in the case that we don't have to develop this right now, can we slot this for the future vNext release and make a strategic decision, making sure that we will have this once we get to the vNext, and also shift the resources to making sure that vNext has resources. So yeah, that was my quick comment. Apologies, I'm going to be repeating myself.
So I'm going to respond and say, I think we need to move quickly on this. I mean, I really do, because it underpins so many of the other things that we want to be able to do, and in particular the sorts of things where we are dealing with remittances as well as internal transactions. However, I would hope, and it's something I've said before, I would hope that we would be able to do this, and indeed the architectural plan is that we should be able to do this in a way that will more or less be vNext-ish. So it's certainly the case that we will be looking as hard as we can at the vNext designs to make sure that whatever we would implement here is something that can be slotted in, hopefully, without modification into the vNext architecture.
Well, you know my thinking about that. The problem, this is a chicken and egg issue, right? Which is, if this is done like this, the decisions that were made today are going to limit the freedom that we have in vNext. So anyway, I just want to put out this question. We should always be asking this question: is this something that we must do right now, or can we wait a bit and do this for the next version of the platform?
So my answer is no. We need to move now. I think. If on the other hand, if you were to say to me, yeah, but vNext is going to be loaded and ready to go by, let's say, Q4 of this year, then I would say, cool. In that case, vNext is my man.
No, that's a fair point. The question is always about resources, right? Because if we do everything now, we will never have resources to deliver in that wish that you have. So if we had enough resources, vNext would be next quarter, but we don't.
I know.
So it's a blanket. It's a blanket.
Yes, indeed.
Anyway,
one of the many things that saddens my life, Pedro, that we can't get vNext quickly enough.
Always a gentleman.
However, for the moment, I'm going to stop sharing and give the stage back to Paul.
Michael, thank you for that. Very enlightening as ever. The next piece was a digital identity integration. I'm going to keep this short because we're already massively over time here, for which I won't apologize. I'll blame everyone else. So digital identity integration. This is all about the emerging or clearly anticipatable need to be able to start addressing payments using a national identity service registration of some form, a national identity number. It is already live in a number of markets. Obviously, we're thinking India and Nigeria. You can do this. Well, Nigeria, they use the BVN rather than the NIMSI, but you take my point. We need to be able to support it. It's not that big a change within Mojaloop itself, because of the architecture around ALS and the link to multiple oracles. We can support this, but there is work that is needed. So first of all, why do we need it? Well, it's all about the ability to support some of the World Bank initiatives around G2P and salary runs and all these other things. There was this huge thing in Nigeria, for example, where when they moved to identity-based payments, a significant number, I believe it was of the order of about 10,000 ghost employees disappeared from the civil service, for example. So we should be able to support this kind of function. It's not about what you'd expect from a national identity service in terms of the ability to assert an identity, the ability to authenticate that the person who is asserting the identity is the legitimate person, the person who has that identity. All of that is out of scope. What we're interested in is the ability of a sender to address a payment to a national identity number. There needs to be work done around an interface definition. Interface to what? Well, the obvious one that we want to start to work with is MOSIP. Open source, potentially usable for national identity services. It's a good starting point. I'm not suggesting it's the only point, but we need to start working with the MOSIP teams on providing an interface where we can take a national identity number and look it up within their service. to check that it is valid, a real identity. We do need to have some form of mechanism to attach that to an FSP ID in some way, to be able to translate. In other words, create an oracle which translates between a national identity number and an FSP ID. Is something that I prefer Mojaloop to do, but Mojaloop is about identity. They're not about payments at all. They don't care about FSPs in any case. Therefore, I can well imagine that we are going to have to develop that particular oracle. We're then going to have to perhaps adapt the double tap approach that we developed in Myanmar for WinePay to allow us to take that national identity, resolve it to an FSP ID, and then resolve it back to an account ID. All of that is eminently achievable. We're not talking about a big piece of work here, but it is going to get very urgent very quickly, I think. Certainly in our discussions that we're having at the moment with the World Bank and through them with Mojaloop and OpenG2P, this is going to become a requirement quite soon. I would urge you to support it, to provide assistance wherever you can. I'm not the person to come up with the technical design of this. I'm more focused on what the product needs to support. So hopefully we could do some work on this over the next couple of months. So thank you. Having said, Miller, please. Miller.
There we go. 3 different mute buttons. Sorry, Paul. Before you go on, I just want to be clear that I think that the engagement with Mojaloop is very useful, and we should look at that, not necessarily assume that they won't do the association work that we would need, but to talk it through with them. And if they say there really just isn't a structure for that in Mojaloop that is manageable, that's fine. What we've said and what we've done in tips and in other places is that the ALS is the way in which we handle this association. And there are a couple of things that are important that fall out of that design, and they're actually fundamental to the way Mojaloop works. So we'd be very careful to maintain those as structural concerns about whatever we choose to do here. But one of them is that the participants make the association themselves between their identifier and the national identifier, and that they never disclose account numbers ever to anyone. So that is the association that is made between the FSP and their customers through national ID. And it's done in 2 places. Once inside of the FSP system, where they say, this customer has this national ID, I can therefore receive payments. The other, of course, is that the Oracle system itself can say, who should I talk to about this transfer? What we've said is that maintenance is a Mojaloop function. It wouldn't be a Mojaloop function. And so the participants add and remove their association through the Oracle interfaces. They already exist, those interfaces. And so the work is laid out in front of us to where there's really nothing to do. The system already supports exactly what you're talking about. Someone needs to show up with a national ID system that needs to be integrated.
It's that integration that I'm really talking about. I think the rest is almost a given. It's just that integration.
So integration with Mojaloop would be for what purpose? Again, we go to outcomes. What would you like to demonstrate?
To demonstrate
and if we can show that,
identity number that is presented is valid.
And I think if we could pick that out and workshop that with the Mojaloop team and say, let's keep it simple, but show that the basic integration uses what we already have on both sides. You're absolutely right that something's going to get built in the middle. That Oracle is going to be built by us, almost certainly, but let's keep it simple. Then we should be able to do that quite quickly, I think.
I think the interface with Mojaloop is simply, we've got this national identity number. Is it valid? Is it a real number? Or has the person died, for example? So
it's the dip. It's usual stuff we dip. Our service interface is already defined. We know what we need out of each ID, and we don't need to worry about the particular context of that ID. We say it is an ID. It's an alias.
You just need to know it's valid, and then it's a matter of building the Oracle for this. I agree. We are in agreement on this. I don't think this
Okay.
is a big deal. We were approached by Pramod Verma, who I'm sure you know. I know him of old from working with the India Stack people. So, and he wants to coordinate this. He and a number of other people want to coordinate this between MOSIP, ourselves, and potentially the Open G2P team.
That'd be
But
awesome. I mean, that's a good combination to workshop through this. Again, I'm being very careful to protect, put a machine gun nest around our architecture. This is how we work, and it's worked successfully. And that may mean doing some custom work on the side to make some of this work. But
but we're
Great,
only interested in doing the payments piece. We're not interested in any aspect of identity management or
correct.
Any form of identity validation beyond it is a real identity.
No, that's the purpose of an oracle, is to say the oracle has the answers. You ask the oracle, and it goes off and dips the database and pays the fee or whatever is required, and comes back with a definitive answer of yes, and you can talk to Acme, or no, this does not exist.
Okay, we're in
Thank
agreement, I think. Yes. Okay, that's it for that, unless there's any other questions. I'm now going to move on to the fraud tool integration. And Greg, I have pinged you a number of times. I'm hoping that you are ready to talk about this. Are you available? Do you want to talk about
I certainly can be. I'm here. I was doing 10,000 things. You know what? I just saw the direct message, the attempt to ping me. So, what would you like me to cover here? I can show you a little bit of the roadmap and what's coming next.
It's all about roadmap and what support you would need from the community.
Okay, so let me forgive me. I was in the middle of an email on something here, so let me get this going and share this with you. Oops. Why is this not working? I'm on a temporary laptop, and I only have so much memory, and I'm not used to that. I'm a very bad user of a small system. So. Okay, let me get this back to where it needs to be. All right, so as far as we're going, as far as roadmap and what we need from the community, and I guess the question is really what the community wants to offer at this point. We're kind of at a natural breaking point / not breaking point, if you will. And so it's really a matter of what we want to have. So as far as what we got going on right now is the more formal definition of what the Center of Excellence is, and assets it will maintain and what it will do, down to we need to rename Actio. We've been calling it Actio as far as the product. And we're going to have a naming process to go through for that down the road. But we still need to do that definition. I showed you, kind of the whole breakout. I could show that to you again. I can go to those slides. But basically, the assets need to get to a Center of Excellence owned location. So right now, although it is all open source, it's been on Lextigo equipment and Lextigo owned software. So the new software which I've already passed on what the endpoints are is actually commissioned, and most of it will probably be moved over, to be honest, within the next week. So I would expect by the end of August full access capability. But this involves Git, Jira. We do use Confluence. We do use Miro. Website development is the lowest on the list. We basically had to put something up because Atlassian gives free use to open source projects, And so it was just one of the requirements. There had to be a website. So that's literally the only reason there's one that's up and running right now. It's got minimal information on it. So at some point we need to round all that out, but that'll also happen more during the definition of what it is that we're really going to be doing. The work that is on the roadmap right now is the performance metrics. So if you guys recall, we did some performance metrics right at the very beginning, where we proved out what we could perform, and then we went into the mode of making full functionality. So we never actually did any new performance tests and performance tuning. And we've got a project going that'll handle the performance metrics, as well as getting us the sizing and things like that. That will be underway shortly. To be honest, if there are suggestions or ideas around how to do that, that's something that you could reach out to Foley, Johannes Foley, to talk about, because I know there's obviously been a lot done on the performance side of things. We are really focused on implementations. We have another fraud group going that has some rather high-profile members, and we're going to try to convince them that they should be our guinea pigs. They should be our testers. And that leads us to the improvement of the implementation documents. So if they do agree to be our testers, we have documentation right now, but the process of working with them in multiple environments with multiple types of systems will in fact flesh out the documentation and make it much better. So specifically, we need to work on the journey to deploy, the journey to manage, and how to modify the system. To modify the system, by modify, I mean how to write my own PPA adapter, or how to write a rule that's beyond basic, if you will. For that matter, how to write a rule in AI and incorporate it into the system. So that's what we really mean by modify. But we're going to be focusing on that. How do we deploy it? How do we manage it? And how do we modify it? By the end of the month, you guys will all be able to do a push button CI/CD implementation it's in an Azure environment at the moment, in Azure, and get it up and running. We're converting the GitHub and like I said, we're in the process right now. We've already produced some training materials, and we will produce more. The first steps will basically be videos, very similar to the journey that Mojaloop has gone through, where things were videos and basic documentation before they became, official courses and things like that. It'll be the same type of concept. And again, like I said, we're looking at implementations where hopefully we're testing with multiple companies, and it's their data, their systems, their variations on a theme that will help produce these case studies and documentation from this. And hopefully some of these will become real implementations that stay live. So that is the big thing that we're working on right now. This really is our roadmap. I've got some more slides that I can show as far as how things are going. But are there any questions as far as what it is that we're planning on doing?
How can we support you, Greg?
Okay, so here's information on the access. I'll go ahead and give you this to upgrade, and this is what we've got. How can you support me? I need subject matter experts. So in particular, the biggest types of experts, and this should be coordinated through Foley, would be, at the moment, would be the DevOps people. I would love subject matter experts that are experts in fraud to work on, but this is a rather complex system. We have the ETL framework, just the data framework alone is a project by itself, to be quite honest. And so we need those type of experts. We need to identify customers for engagements. So, is StitsaWorks interested in any of these types of things? Are you aware of anybody that perhaps wants to be an OEM? Because the approach we're taking with this is that, the customers are varied. This isn't like Mojaloop in that it touches a lot of different types of things or can work for many different types of things. So an NGO may use it to deal with supply chain fraud, for example. All that is changing out what the adapter is at the front, what systems it connects to, and the data, as well as then writing rules that are specific to them and typologies that's specific to that. Otherwise, the entire framework stays, the same. So I would say that we're interested in, whomever makes sense as far as customers and working with people to find those customers. We're interested in proving out whether or not they would make a good customer. The example I just gave on working with an NGO, maybe it's not practical because maybe say they're using Microsoft Dynamics and they're already using the fraud components that are available in Dynamics. So maybe they won't deal with that. But that is the type of thing that we need is SMEs, the DevOps types of people, and help with that. And then we're eventually going to need, but I'm not going to work on it right off the bat. We're going to need. You guys have been doing a lot of work on how to go to multiple cloud platforms. Right now, we just wanted to get this working. We go to Azure. So we do go to Kubernetes. We can, in fact, run this down on a very small device, like say Raspberry Pi, not very well. But we can run this on a very small implementation of Kubernetes. So I heard Miller earlier say we really weren't necessarily using Kubernetes correctly or the way that it can be. I took from that we're not using it as natively in Mojaloop as possible. We are using it very natively. So any help along those lines, for that matter, the folks we have are very good with it. So we know this from the interaction that we've had amongst each other, that these folks are quite competent. And again, Foley is the resource for those types of things. So I'm going to share this, what I've got coming up. There's going to be a pitch later on today that is a combination of the deck that you saw and then ends with this call to action, right? Where I'm going to be talking to this group. I'm going to say, we need your real life testing, your data, your systems, your needs. You're a perfect fit for this. Matt's going to explain more how this could potentially work, and then Matt will hop in. But what we're trying to drive to is to where we would do a convening that looks roughly like this. And we're hopeful that it will be in September, but who knows, the people we have in mind may not want to do a convening. And that's advice that we, maybe we need help with. But on day 2, we actually plan on giving everybody their own little sandbox, letting them generate a system live for themselves and letting them play with the config and the setup. All right. And then we intend to, on day 3, where they walk through, a formal, how do you write good test case? What are the test case? These people were already organized by groups. And then they would report that out on day 4. And we end with a workshop scenario where we basically say, okay, now we walk them through mapping out their journeys. What are their options for installations? So direct Kubernetes, is it Docker, is it what? The needs for PPA, to identify roughly the needs. And we're not planning on doing the whole definition here, obviously. But you would need to make these kind of adjustments to an adapter to pull in, your information. Identifying the sources of the data while making, high-level ETL plan, because that's critical to stuff like this. And then we'll report that out. So, and they would leave with, in essence, a very high straw man plan of how something like this could work. And then hopefully we would just continue to drive this forward. So that's what we go on. That's what we've got going on. What do we need? We don't really need any help on the coding side right now. It's code complete. We do expect there'll be some modifications on the performance tuning, but we do think that's just going to be tuning and configuration. It's not going to be much in the way of coding, if any. Really, Foley is the main point of reference for that. Myself as well. I'm just Greg at frms.io, and Foley is Johannes at frms.io, and I'll put that up. But that's what we plan to do.
Thanks, Greg. There is a question in the chat from Nee asking about timelines.
Okay, so timelines as far as being able to implement and things like that, it's already ready. It works. It's code complete. You know, I'm sure that's the reason we want to do implementations right now. Is we need to work out any kinks. It works and works well with test data, but we all know, as they say about like battles, a good battle plan is a great battle plan until the minute the battle starts, right? Until the actual thing starts.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's the same thing that's going to happen here. So we need to, you know, basically start the trials by error, you know, types of phases. But it is functional. And I apologize that we've not really given people much in the way of access at the moment, but we were on a mission to get done in the amount of time. And we'll work now on making it more open. The typologies are in fact going to be managed separately. You know, we haven't figured that out. That's part of this defining the COE. But basically, this is you know, a Jira and Confluence type system, and GitHub. So.
Okay, thank you very much, Greg. That's really good.
Hopefully, I got you back on schedule too. Okay.
Yeah, well, we're only 45 minutes late, so it's not bad.
All right. I'm around other than Matt and I have to be in this other meeting. I think it's at 4. So, but I'll be around as much as I can for you guys. So.
Cool. Thank you. Thank Greg. Next on the list is merchant payments, which is back to me. I mentioned in the previous days of the convening that we're doing a lot of work about getting money into people's wallets. So obviously, I mean, the obvious way is P2P, but we did significant amount of work in the last PI and are continuing to in this PI around bulk. The only reason that it's not one of the candidate work streams today is that bulk is so far advanced that the efforts is sort of well planned for and support isn't really needed. But that's a classic way of getting money into people's accounts. And similarly, the work that we want to do around digital identity integration is again all about support for G2P services, ECT, and therefore again getting money into people's accounts through salary runs or through government payments or through NGO payments, COVID support, whatever it may be. It's all about getting money into people's accounts and or people's wallets. Once it's there, what we really don't want them to do is cash out, because really, what is the point then? So we need to support as many possible ways in which people might use the money in their wallet without cashing out. I mean, obviously there's bill payments, school fees, medical fees, all of those things, and that's really important as well. So integration with billers, but merchant payments, I would argue, is probably the most important of all. If you think about people's day-to-day transactions, in many countries that we're dealing with, particularly in rural areas, refrigeration is rare, principally because electricity supplies are intermittent, and therefore people are buying fresh food every day, potentially up to about 2-3 transactions, often with stall holders per day. So that's looking at maybe 20 plus transactions a week just on that, before you consider anything else. And transactions are a major source of revenue for obviously the mobile money services. And so we need to be able to support that in an interoperable, interconnected way as thoroughly as we can. Now, in the previous PI, we did a report out of the work that had been done by myself, Justice and Lewis in the merchant payments space. Sad to say, Justice then chose to focus entirely on fraud, moving away from merchant, and Lewis, of course, has left the community as a whole entirely. So consequently, there's been a lack of progress on merchant payments. I would like to show where we were previously. If I can just find the right window. There we are. So we've developed this merchant payments ecosystem, which obviously had the customer front end, a merchant payments extension module, a merchant registry module, and the Mojaloop hub itself. We have done significant work in defining each of these. We had developed a merchant backlog, for example. We've done a significant amount of work on the use cases, and we were looking at the various features that the merchant backlog needed. We hadn't refined any of this, so significant work is needed to really refine the backlog and to drive it down to the next level of detail before it can be submitted for development by anyone at all. We need significant support there, and I would definitely be hoping that we get support from some of the systems integrators, maybe some of these service operators in this. I personally think merchants is an extremely important use case, as I've said, and it is a great sadness to me that it stalled in the last PI. So I think that's all I want to say, bearing in mind my comment that we're already 45 minutes late and are 50 minutes late. So are there any questions? Nope. That's great. I'm glad you all support merchant payments. Thank you. Finally, the last candidate workstream was vNext. And I sent a message to you, Pedro, and to Miguel, asking if one of you might be prepared to talk about this and support for vNext. Is that, Pedro, are you there? Yes, you are there. So,
I am.
Yeah. Thank you. So
Yes,
I'll
I have.
sharing and excuse me a moment and hand over to you, Pedro, if I may.
Thanks, Paul. Yes, well, I have to start with an apology for not having nice slides. I was assuming that we would be continuing the same logic from last convening, where we would not be using voting slots for vNext because it spans multiple PIs. However, that's a wrong assumption from my end, so I apologize for that. However, I'm not going to lose the opportunity to explain what we're doing again and how anyone can help us. So hopefully you still remember vNext's first day presentation, and I'm going to refresh a bit of our objective, the plan that we have and where we are, and then terminate this talk with what we actually need. So to recap, our objective is to produce the next version of the Mojaloop platform. And this is no easy task. A few PIs ago, we executed the performance and scalability POC. This was a very deep architectural and technical work that Miguel and I did for a bit of time. And we concluded that the current architecture needs a revolutionary enhancement to be prepared for the future scalability requirements. So essentially, the point is we can still make improvements today. But we know that in the future, as we go to the next level of scalability requirements, we will need to change some of the foundation that we have. So with that in mind, we took the opportunity to create a reference architecture, and this would help us identify what would be the perfect architecture for the future. Essentially, having the reference architecture is the first step to having a very solid foundation for a technical roadmap. And what this allows us to have is that vision of, it's almost like a Christmas list. Request is very naive, but it is very effective in the information it provides. It basically is, what would be the perfect design, the perfect architecture that we would produce if we had unlimited resources. And as naive as this sounds, this is really helpful because we then can put that design on the wall and then say, this is what good looks like. So every decision, every technical and architectural decision that we make from now on Michael is complaining about Christmas. So every architecture decision that we make from now on, we can have this framing for that decision. Is the change that we're trying to introduce? Is the new functionality that we're starting to build or that we need to build something that we can build and shape it so that it looks at the end like that reference architecture? Or is the change that we're making not going to look at all like the target architecture? It's not going to bring us closer to that target architecture, to that vision, and then we have to justify it as a tactical decision, which is perfectly fine. The point being, either we make changes and invest the little resources that we have in going towards that end goal that we have discussed, that we have designed and created as a community, or we assume that some of the things that we're going to be doing are going to shift resources away from that future vision, but they are needed for some tactical reason right now. And there's plenty of examples of that. I ramble a lot about the question, should we be doing some functionality? Should we build something right now, or should we wait for vNext? The point that I tried to make here is not specifically about the actual development that's being discussed. The point is, I'm trying to ingrain in our minds that question, that doubt, and that decision-making process every time that we use resources. Is this something that we really need right now so we can make a concession in terms of architecture? Or is this something that would probably be better fit for the vNext release? So this is the objective and the how we got to the place where we are. What are we doing now? We're building that next version of Mojaloop, and this is a very hard exercise because we're trying to build that perfect vision with the practicality of and the reality of not having enough resources. So what we have is a build plan that we think is realizable. It's deliverable, and our build plan is composed of 3 phases. The first phase is the alpha phase. What we mean is that when we're building the alpha phase, we're focused more on the architectural aspects of the platform foundation and less on the functional aspects. So we only implement the main use cases for each area. So for example, if we're doing participant lifecycle management, we're only going to do as much as we need to have participants in the system and to test some of the, for example, make a checker mechanisms, because that's a foundation aspect that we have. Also, the authorization mechanisms. So we're now working on this alpha version. After that, we will move to a beta version. A beta version, by definition, is something that's closer to production. And what we'll do when we are finished with alpha and start beta is we'll change the focus of what we're doing. We're going to stop doing the hard architecture design of the foundation, because hopefully by then, well, not hopefully, that's the plan. By then, those hard design choices of the foundation are settled, they are stable, and we are going to start putting the meat on the bone. So essentially, we're going to start building the other functionality, the other use cases that didn't make the alpha version because they were not essential for us to prove the point of the architecture that we were building in the alpha. And obviously that's going to include all of the use cases that our platform supports, all of the functionality, including non-happy path use cases, failure modes, and the typical exceptional scenarios. So this is the beta version. Effectively, what we're going to aim for is feature complete, non-productive ready, not productive ready, but feature complete. Once we have this, and by the way, this beta version will be the first one that is meant to be deployed and experimented with. So once we release the beta version, what we expect and what we really need is for everyone that is able to deploy a beta version, and with that deployment start to experiment with it and provide feedback so that we can improve the beta version. once we release this beta version and we start having feedback, we'll start the last phase before going to production, which is ironing out the issues and the small bugs that we have that we didn't discover during the beta phase. And for that, we will need a lot of help from the community, not from the development perspective, but from the perspective of users that need to implement this, DevOps operators, anyone that can fiddle and install the beta version and start providing feedback about what's not good, what needs to be enhanced and so on, so that we can iron those things out until we produce a production-ready version. So this is the build plan. As I mentioned, we are at the alpha phase, which means we're focusing very hard on that foundational aspect of the architecture and including only the minimum use cases in terms of high-level functionality. And well, what do we need? Well, as always, we need developers. So anyone with TypeScript and Node.js experience that has 2 or 3 days a week to spare, please reach out. We really need help, and you're more than welcome. And I'm not trying to be picky with the time demand. The problem that we have is that at this stage, we're developing those foundations, and every little task that we have is already big. So we don't have small things to change. Everything is always on the big side because it impacts the architecture. It impacts the foundation. So you change something very small in one side, and then you realize that that requires a change somewhere else. So we don't have small tasks to do. We have big tasks at this moment. It's just the way it is. This is why alpha phases for the foundation are so important, and they require a close-knit team, dedicated resources that can work constantly and very focused in this task. Later during the beta development, this is when we are going to have a lot more smaller tasks that will not require architecture consequences, or it will not affect the architecture as we build them. So what we expect is that right now we need a bit of involvement from developers, and we do need a lot of help from developers. So if you have significant 2 or 3 days of time, please help out. If you only have a bit of time, a few hours a week, reach out anyway. We'll try to find something for you to do. But know that as soon as we get to the beta version, to the beta development stage, we will have a lot more smaller tasks that need contribution. We'll also need a lot more testing. So once we get to the beta, we will need a lot of help with small tests. And hopefully, a lot of the folks that don't want to commit with time will be able to help us during the beta phase, because that's where we will have a lot of small tasks to be done, and anyone can pick up a small task and then just do it when they have time. So this is a strategic decision of the plan that we're enforcing. Our point is to get over the alpha version as soon as possible, and then start opening development to pretty much everyone, and realizing the value as soon as possible, so that once we get to the beta version, people can start installing this and deploying it and seeing how it works and seeing the benefits. And then we can start opening up the development team to pretty much anyone that has a few hours a week. So this is the ask. Well, 2 asks. First, decision-making process. Let's please consider if something that is a big development can be slotted in the vNext development, because we need the resources, and anything that shifts significant resources to the vNext will help us deliver vNext faster. And I know this is a chicken and egg problem. And again, I'm not trying to shift resources away from stuff that has to be done right now. But I'm doing my role. I'm leading the vNext development, so I really need help on the development side of things. So that's our ask for the community. If you have time, please reach out. We need all of the help that we can get. And if you only have a few hours of time, reach out anyway, and we'll try to find some tests and some smaller tasks that you can commit to. That's it. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Pedro. That was very eloquent. Thank you. So all of the workstream leads have now presented, and we're now going to enter the phase of voting. So Simeon, can I hand over to you for that? Or Yeah, see the link for voting has appeared in the chat as well. So Simeon.
All right. So again, in the chat there's a link to a SurveyMonkey. You'll be voting for up to 3 work streams. So if you go to that link, you will have the options. Actually, I'm going to share my screen here just so that we're all on the same page. And I'll see if I can put the link in Slack as well. So if you click on the link, there we go, links in Slack as well. So if you go to the link in the chat or in Slack, you'll be able to see a simple SurveyMonkey link with 1 question. Please select your top 3 workstream topics. You have 3 votes. You can use them any way you like. You can give one workstream all your 3 votes. You can give, you can spread them across 3 different ones, or it's entirely your choice. And once you have your 3 topics, please vote. Then once you click submit, I will give you a short break. The break that we will take will, sorry, just pulling up the agenda here. We're a little bit over time, so I want to see how best to balance this out. We'll take a 5-minute, well, no, I'll give you a 10 minutes break. So at 15 past the hour, we'll be back, and at 15 past the hour, we'll come and start the Workstream Breakouts. So the Workstream Breakouts, by then, there'll be breakout rooms and for the top 3 workstreams. So please take some time to vote now. And we'll be able to see which the top 3 workstreams are. Then the top 3 workstreams will have breakout sessions. In the interest of time, we'll reduce the breakouts to 45 minutes so that we can be done at 3 p.m. UTC. So is that 3 p.m.? Did I calculate that correctly? Yes. So do vote, and then please join us back at 15 minutes past the hour. Thanks, everyone.
You guys there? I was just.
Yeah, the breakout rooms just imploded.
The timing, so we are in the main room.
So sorry, welcome back, everyone. Yeah, the time just ended. Sorry about that. I know that caught even me off guard, but thank you for the conversations. One of the things that I will ask is for each group to give a brief report out. And let's see if we can do this in the next half hour and try and bring this to a close on time. There were 3 groups. We probably should start with FX and new settlement models. Michael?
Oh, sorry, you muted me when I came back to the thing. Yes.
Okay,
It's okay. Right. So we basically, I'm sorry to say that Miller and I spent quite a long time talking to each other about how the foreign exchange stuff should work. The position we came round to is to say we need to workshop this to give it a good kicking and get the details sorted out. I have agreed to go back and do some more work, really to highlight and structure the issues that we discussed during this, and I will then make an open call for a workshop which interested parties can attend, hopefully in the next couple of weeks. So that's on that side. We didn't really get that much time to talk about settlement, but we did get some potential improvements to the design, and particularly to the question that was asked about closing settlement batches. So I think we probably have a potential for an answer on that. I'll do a bit more work on that. And I think that's it. So this was Simon's question about closing a batch. I think that's it.
Okay. Excellent.
Thank you, Jacques. By the way, sorry.
No, that's all right. I was watching. I was looking for the comments to see if there's any comments. Excellent. I'm going to pass this. Is Greg there, Greg? For the fraud or anyone, I don't see. Oh, Greg had to jump. Anyone from the fraud who can give a quick report out? Okay. Then why don't we go to infrastructure? Tom and David.
Sure. All right. Well, I'll go to the same as what we were looking at. Here's what we changed and updated to. Level 1, no changes. Level 4 went away and has been reworded. Its main purpose, and now it becomes level 3. And the main purpose is to resemble production, provide a foundation for going to production. So I hope that takes into account David's cautions and from earlier. And then all of the discussion was really, or the bulk of the discussion was really around level 2. We tried various ways to define it. We probably needed some more business people in there. Although we had from Douglas, who's a fintech, that we had some input talking about an incubator function, hence they captured that. And then right at the end, just as we were getting bumped from the room, Simeon prompted some discussion that really the sandbox level 2 should be actually a sandbox. It could be an implementation that is actually up and running, i.e. what Lewis had for OSS Lab, but maybe it's an implementation of the IAC. And in fact, instead of this being a development job, it actually becomes an operations job and cost. And I think that would be a good that would be a good thing to bat around a little bit more. I know that Paul is setting up some meetings to discuss this and take this a little bit further over the next little while. I noticed that the meeting for next week has just gotten put off again. I think his time zone issues. And David,
too many people are declining, couldn't make it.
Yeah, I can be flexible with time, Paul. I can help you out there. I'm used to working where, it's Seattle, Boston, and Bangalore and Adelaide. So let's talk about that one. But David was just making a comment as we got bumped back into the rooms about the continuously existing sandbox that people could just connect to. David, I think you're about to say something important. Is that something you're happy to share with the whole audience here, or for later?
I can share it. I think Pedro was the one that got cut off. What I said was that we can make a distinction between the hackathon type of environments that are for an event that are short-lived and have a specific audience purpose for a given audience, right? Versus the foundation's long-running sandbox that might have to serve multiple purposes. And so I was just making a distinction between those two instead of just calling it, the hackathon or the whatever sandbox, because this isn't really all sandboxes, right? Miniloop is a developer tool. The level 3 is really for running a switch. And the middle one is our sandbox description. And I'm just saying we should probably make the distinction between this long running sandbox for the foundation versus a hackathon short-lived environment. That's it. So
yeah.
Just to add on to that, and I think also what was probably mostly agreed on was that it's probably all based on the AIC. So it's not like specific separate, technology or whatever stack that's being used. It's all based on the same AIC stack for those use cases.
For the hackathon as well, I mean, for the long-lived foundation one, I would say yes. For the short-lived, I think it depends on the purpose of it.
Yeah,
because that could be a skinny down version or it could be a TTK, or it could be whatever. But that I think needs a little bit more flushing out.
And I think the one thing that we did decide was that the discussion around the TTK, we have that. We have that. It's needed for dev test. It can be used for hackathons or whatever at will. So it doesn't really need anything extra. And so we sort of to try and simplify, we've taken that one out of the discussion for the moment because it's a bit of a given. And really all the discussion is around level 2 and what that should be and what it should look like. So Paul, I think our work is cut out. Our work is actually much more narrowed for when we can get a meeting together. It's simply to find level 2. So I feel like this is narrowed things quite a bit. And I thanks a lot, guys, because I think that's progress.
Yeah, for me, the infrastructure plans are the big win of this convening. So thank you guys for working so hard on it. Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Miller, I see your comment in there. I don't know if you want to voice your thanks. And
yeah, I just think this is excellent. I mean, this reduction to what really are these 3 different modes of use this is ideal. The only question that I would ask, and it can be taken up during the workshop sessions later, was the assumption that was made during the discussion earlier was possibly the TTK was the purpose for level 2. Where does that land? Do we now do we assume that that's really more part of the level 1 setup, or is this how does that fit into this mode? I'll say the simulation versus running of the code.
So what we said is that if you're running a hackathon and you don't need a switch and you don't want to be, and Sam made the point, actually, I think Sam clarified things for me a little bit more, was that if you don't need a switch, if a switch is overhead, because what you're really focused on is the APIs and dealing with the APIs. But then we said, well, let's take that out of this discussion because we have it. We have it and we need it for dev test. We need it for developing Mojaloop. And so it's not really something that we don't have or unlikely to have in the future.
So we could say that the needs of the incubator hackathon might be met with a simulation environment, at least in part or part-time. And we have that. That's really that's drawing on the level 1 tools for that. But that level 2, as you defined it here in the IAC world, is running the switch for a purpose, for a short-term event with the intention that it has no long life. We're going to tear it down. The POC is actually, it is production, but it's not production in the sense of a open market system. It is a closed system for the purposes of running a proof of concept or something that is expected to have longer term. Did I understand that difference between 2 and 3?
I don't think quite, no. So
okay.
So I think where so yes to what you said about the TTK. So we're just trying to simplify and narrow the conversation as to what do we need to do. Don't think there's anything we need to do with the TTK, because VJ and TTK development is happening and it's necessary, it's fundamental, right? And yeah, it's already part of level 1, but it's also its own thing and all that, right? So we just settle it. And McGill pointed out that, sometimes for a hackathon and for an incubator, sometimes you'll need a switch and other times you won't. So that's why we took it out, because if you don't need a switch, well, we've simply got the TTK and it's there. So let's talk about when you do need a switch. And then Simeon said, well, some of the people he's working with really just want what Lewis had with OSS Sandbox, my interpretation.
Got
of
it.
what's in it. Basically, they just want something that they can connect to. They don't want to have to deploy or anything. So the question is, does level 2 simply need to be an operationals ask where the foundation or somebody runs and pays for the resources, or does it need to be so drop dead simple that somebody else can go and do it? Now with Google at the moment, we're doing it the other way with drop dead simple so that somebody else can run it. But I think that there's a larger need there that we just need to define. And that's really what the Sandbox that's what the task is now, is just define level 2 outside of the TTK, because we have that. So level 2 might be TTK in some cases, or it might be this longer running thing, or it might be just some tools that somebody can start up their incubator and stuff themselves. That's what we've got to define.
Got it. Whereas 3 and 1 are pretty well obviously defined as they are. Thank you.
Exactly.
I also think it's worth mentioning that I think we should be not referring to level 2. We should be referring to use cases. We should be saying, what infrastructure does a hackathon need? Who are the people that are in the infrastructure? Okay, you're going to have DFSPs. Probably they don't need a switch. They can use the TTK. Then you might have people that want to be switch operators. Then they're most likely you need a switch so they can interface with it or add or play with the internal components. So I feel like we are getting it a little bit wrong by focusing on the levels, in my opinion, I think.
So would you say something like level 1 instead? You would say like developer, single user developer, something like that. And then you've got incubator hackathon, and then you have long running proof of concept or something like that. Or are you getting at something else? I'm sure. I'm not sure I'm following you.
I wouldn't even refer to them as levels. I would just say, this is the use case you need, and this is the infrastructure you need for it. I would rather define this by the use cases, not by levels. And I think by doing level 2, we are potentially oversimplifying things where we might be missing things. So I think we should have boxes to say, for hackathons, this is the kind of infrastructure you need. For this is what you need. So I think we should be rather have the verticality like that. I think that makes us focused, and I think it'll keep us in the right place and have the right requirements for each of those.
So then that's the output of the workshop that you want to see, is a definition of, for the time now we have 3 things. They're not levels, but there are 3 things: demo dev, incubator, hackathon, and sandbox POC. And you want to define what's needed for those things. Is that right?
Yeah, that's what I would do, because I feel like we're oversimplifying things and trying to fit things into level 1, 2, 3, which I think is not correct. I think we should be focusing on those use cases and what do those use cases need, and putting, okay, this kind of use case needs this kind of infrastructure.
I would also add the level of effort for the person or the team implementing it or starting it to actually get that thing working, get that sandbox working, and the level of resources. So if you look at a nice table that says on one end, you have something that takes very little resources, has this and functionality, and it's pretty easy to do. And then you go to the other end of the scale where you have the POC sandbox, where you can say, this is the closest to production minus production concerns. It also needs a lot of resources and it needs skills. So in the middle, you will have different levels of effort, resources, and features. And I would also add to the conversation that I still think that we do need that sandbox that's available, that is resettable. So every now and then, every Sunday, there's a reset, so people can have that self-service mechanism where they go to an endpoint that exists. They register as a participant, as a DFSP, and they just use it until it's reset. I think that's a very good idea. However, I don't think that forces us to use that as the level 2. I still think that there's a benefit of having an install mechanism for a team of developers that want to have a local in-house switch that they can share as they extend Mojaloop, for example.
So really getting to the outcome that we're seeking, it's those 3 definitions, and then how those get used, whether we create a standing hackathon environment or not is a separate question, but we have to answer this other question first of what do we need to have in order to run one of these things. And it seems like, to go to Miguel's point, if we follow the use cases, whether we're hosting the hackathon ourselves and we reset it every Sunday, or whether it's something somebody else hosts, it's the same stuff. We still have to define what do we have to bring into that environment. So that seems like maybe, is that the output we would expect from that work stream then?
Yeah,
that definition and the gap.
Yeah, and define, but it comes down to define that middle box. I'm not calling it level 2 now. All that was a useful handle.
The use case approach, right? Yeah.
Yes. So the middle use case.
Okay.
I think that might have to be broken up into more than one box, but yeah, agree.
Okay.
And I think then I think it becomes a bit simpler, because then we might be, for the hackathon, we map TTK in there, we map the AIC in there. Oh, but the AIC is overcomplicated. Oh, can we make it a bit configurable so we can simplify it? And that means then you have more portability from an AIC perspective. And the less AIC you have in this world, the easier it is to maintain, etc. The less, the more people using it, etc.
I'm going to cut in here and say this is something I think Tom and sorry, David, perhaps we can figure out in a workshop and just finalize this going into the PI. Tom?
Sounds good.
Yeah, that's me being quiet so you can move on.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Paul, Macon, I'll pass it to you if you want to close off this session before we go on to the final one.
Yeah, thank you, Simeon. That's the infrastructure session I thought was extremely useful. I'm going to be scheduling the meeting. Well, I said in my email earlier today, or was it yesterday? I'm going to try and schedule the meeting for probably the week after next, because next week apparently failed for most people. So I'll try for the week after next. And I think that it might be useful if Tom and David, if I could get an agenda sorted out with the pair of you before we go into that. I'll also be taking the output from this session today, clearly. With regard to Forex and settlement, there's a lot more work needing doing there. Michael, you were gathering your thoughts rising out of the Forex discussion. I'm hoping that you'll circulate some document out of that over the next few days, please.
Hope is a very valuable thing to have.
Indeed, hope springs eternal. And then I think that we're going to have to try and have another workshop, probably to move a little further on that and to bring in all of the settlement issues. On the final piece, fraud, I'm afraid that I didn't catch anything out of that. I have no idea how it went. I'll try and catch up with Greg after this meeting, and we'll see where we can go after that. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for your contributions. It's been extremely interesting and full of energy. So great. Thank you. Couldn't have asked for more. Thank you. And back to you, Simeon.
Thanks so much, Paul. I do want to bring this to a close fairly quickly, but we've got one final session, which is more recognition and awards for those in our community who've made significant contributions and have been very active. I want to first start with Catherine, if you're ready, with the winner of our PI19 convening trivia. And the winner is third point. Ooh, Tilly, interesting. At second point, Sam. Sam, you got dethroned. And at first slot, the winner of this convening is Haley. And PA comes out fourth. Rajesh in Canada comes out fifth. Congratulations to all you folks. Sam, you've been dethroned officially. Steve will find a way to give you a nice little golden, crown to keep for the next 2 PIs until our next virtual convening. Thank you so much for sharing that, Catherine. Sam's boasting that he missed the first round. That's no excuse, Sam, but thank you so much for participating. Excellent. I will go into my presentation here. So just give me a second. Most of you are aware, if not, I'm happy to repeat this information, but one of the things that we've been keen for a few PIs now is to actively recognize those in our community who have made some significant contribution. And this is that session where we're able to do this, and it will not take me 3 minutes to go through all this entire deck, but I just want to share it with you. I hope you're seeing my screen.
Yeah.
Okay. So I obviously would like to start with some statistics. The total number of Mojaloop participants in Q2 of 2002 is 2,154. We're a pretty big and active community. We just need to get better at organizing our resources around the priorities that we pick. But that's the total number of Mojaloop participants. That is how they're spread across in Q2. That is how they're spread across the different levels which we're tracking. Those who are no level are on 17 people. We've got, these are active members, not the total members. These are the number of active people in our community over Q2. Those on the fringe explorers are 91, they're the majority. Participants, those who are likely engaging, writing code, contributing here and there are 21, which is excellent. Those who are contributors are 5. These are people who contribute deeply, but not as deeply, certainly much more in a much more in-depth capacity than the participants do. And then builders, these are those who are actively building and also take up leadership roles in our community are 11. This is the spread of active members of our community in the last quarter. A somewhat significant drop down from Q1, but as we continue to refine how we spread our resources across the priorities we have, this should get better over the next PI as we move along. So let's talk about awards. I'm going to give 2 awards, one, the usual ones, and a surprise somewhere in there in the end. The active community members and new and promising community members. The active community members, this is in recognition of community members who have actively contributed to the development of Mojaloop this quarter, Q2 2002. And the list is there. Top of the list is Miguel. We've got Kevin Leah. We've got Sam Kumari as a top 3. Congratulations to you folks. And the others, Michael Wagner, Vijay Guti, Emma Mwanje, official UG, I think is new, Tulume Nicholas, Michael Richards, Louis Deli, and Pedro Barreto. This list, for the first time, now includes folks who are actively working in advocacy. So you can see some of the high people folks there. So a big congratulations and a round of applause to them. Those are the active community members in Q2 of 2002. New and promising community members. This is recognizing those of the folks who are new. Some of them are actually on the call today. New and promising community members who have engaged actively in the last quarter. That list includes Joe Samuel, Sandy So, Goncalo Garcia, as a top 3, which is excellent. I think I did see Garcia's pull request on GitHub someday. There are a few other names we listed there, either on using their Twitter names or using the Twitter or GitHub monikers. We've got Reconnect, we've got Bruce Tushabe, Yuan Junliang, we've got Bridge Crew, Keinaje, 2 Blockchain, and Fabrice Bizimana from Rwanda. Excellent to have all these folks welcome and join them. We started the habit of, if we're able to see your new activities, either on GitHub or Slack or elsewhere, we do come and say hello and thank you for your contributions again. Here's a surprise, a special recognition. Over the last, maybe not quarter, but for some time now, we have received some very significant contributions that really do push Mojaloop forward or keep it going. And so this is in recognition of those people. The first person that we want to recognize, unfortunately is not here with us, is Mr. Louis Stalley. For quite some time, Louis has been helping us with the DevOps piece while he was working with, while he was part of the community. And he spent quite a bit of time building the first version of the Sandbox, or what you're calling, Tom calling the OSS lab. And he's done quite a bit of work in PISP and versioning over the last couple of years, and we want to take this time to give a special recognition to Louis. The Mojaloop Foundation has sent him a small gift. If he unwraps it, he might take a picture and share it with you on Slack. So congratulations to Louis. Louis, as you heard, some of you may know, took up the role, a new role at Boy Money, which is a fintech startup that works on the issues around float. You can check out the website at Boy, B-U-O-Y, .money. And hopefully they'll be back. Louis did say that they might be back to work with us in the community. So if you do happen to bump into Louis, please, on behalf of this community, send him a thank you note, letting him know that we appreciate everything that he's done for our community. There's surprisingly 2 other people. Mr. Michael Richards, over the last, it might come to us as a surprise to him, over the last few months, has been actively trying to get Mojaloop involved and registered as part of the ISO 20022 organization. So for all his efforts and for the team that works with him, we want to give Michael a special recognition and thank him for the amazing work he's done, in particular with regard to ISO 20022. So Michael, thank you very much. There's one more person. Mr. Innocent Kawoya and all the awesome folks behind High People, who for countless of months have been actively engaging fintechs in the region through the 40-day 40 fintech program. They have actively advocated and very vigorously advocated for Mojaloop and for the level 1 principles. So a big round of applause to Innocent for all the work that he's done. And it might be useful to note that Innocent has just begun expanding his work across East Africa. So if you're ever in Kenya or Tanzania or wherever else and you bump into him, that would be the reason why. So we definitely look forward to we definitely appreciate Innocent and the High People folks for the active advocacy that they do for Mojaloop and the foundation. So congratulations to all our community members who received recognition in this PI meeting for their outstanding contribution to the Mojaloop open source project. A huge round of applause for them. Thank you so much to all those folks. Everyone's calling Innocent Lord Mayor. Fun fact, it might come as a trivia in the next convening. Innocent ran for mayor of Kampala. So there's a heads up for the next convening trivia. So just before we wrap up, we have There are a couple of announcements that I want to share before I pass it to maybe Miller to close out for us. The next convening is going to be a hybrid convening. So the next convening will be the week of October 24th to 28th. It will be in sunny, sandy, dusty Zanzibar in Tanzania, which would be excellent. We've already, believe it or not, started working on a great agenda and a few interesting surprises. So please do consider booking your flights and getting ready and all prepped up for Zanzibar. We shall have that information out to you as soon as possible to enable you to plan. It would be really awesome to see all of you folks there. We shall talk to the airlines to make sure your bags arrive on time. So point noted there. That's the first one. The second thing is, oh yes, also as part of Zanzibar, I should recognize that we're working to have, last year in September, was it September? We had our first ever business convening. So this coming year, we are going to have both a business focused and a tech focused convening in Zanzibar. So please do not feel, if you're on the business folks and thought this was too technical, don't worry, we've got something for you. So please do consider joining us there. After this call, after this meeting, there will be a survey that goes out. Please do feel free to take out the survey. The link is actually in the chat. Now, in the past, we've received 4 or 5 responses to this survey, and that doesn't help us plan. We do, however, get feedback in other forums that you want day 3 changed, or you have this idea that you'd like to include in the program or in the logistics. The primary way you can get that information to us, that in a way that we can act and report on and keep track, is by filling in the survey. So the link is in the chat. You will also all get it to your emails. Please do take 2 minutes to fill out the survey and give us feedback on all the sessions and everything. That would be highly, highly, highly appreciated. Yeah, that said, in a coming week, look out for some of the Workstream workshops. You'll definitely hear from Paul and myself on this going forward. So keep that in mind and do please plan to contribute and engage. There are a number of items that have come up either in the convening or inside conversations. If you feel if they're technical, or if you want those items addressed from a governance point of view, please send them all to me. We'll either send it off to the Community Council or the Design Authority, or if it involves an API, the Change Control Board. So feel free to bring those up. And with that, I think, Miller, I can pass it to you if you've got any closing remarks.
Just briefly, obviously this has been a whirlwind for 3 days to try to work through all of this stuff. Really glad people showed up. I mean, we had a really good turnout, I think, for this form of meeting, which I think we're all getting kind of weary of. And I'm very happy that the team is working on Zanzibar. It's going to be an amazing thing. Really would encourage people to come for it. If you can do it, but you thought maybe I won't, you'll be disappointed. If you can't make it, we will be hybrid and you will have a chance to participate. So it won't be all or nothing. But I think leading up to Zanzibar will be important as well. There was a lot of work that we kicked off in these working sessions, but we really need to have more working sessions to really get defined what it is that we're doing and make some progress. There's been a lot going on that we didn't really cover this week, such as the tiger beetle work and some other things going on with the settlement and reporting and business ops framework. But I think that we'll have an opportunity to progress those things in the meantime. I hope we will, and you get a chance to really come together. Nothing we can do about the time zones. That's just maybe a rotating schedule where everybody has some pain. But please do come together for those. It really makes a difference if we give people a venue in which to contribute. And then I'm very much looking forward to seeing everybody in Zanzibar. It's been an amazing year when you think about what we've been through to get to this point. Oh my gosh. But it's going to be an amazing outcome if we all come together and really make this thing work. We've got a number of adopters that are coming up as well. And I know Steve is getting pretty excited about that. So we definitely want to show them support, because that's what makes this all worthwhile. I really think there's an option to pull some of the adopters into some of our working sessions, even though they aren't yet part of the technical community. There's a venue here for them, and we hope to get their inputs. What matters to them? What priorities can we help them with? Ultimately, if the community can be helpful, it will be relevant, and the software will continue to grow. I have really nothing more to add other than my thanks for everybody showing up this week. It's tough some environments, but I'm very, very happy with the progress we're making. And thank you all. I hand it back to you, Simeon.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Miller. I do want to pass along the thanks and regards from Paula. She was out sick this week, but getting better. So hopefully she'll be able to connect with you all again. Thank you again for joining us, everybody. See you next time. Have an excellent rest of your day and weekend. Thanks all.
Simeon?
Yep.
Just take note, I think there's a problem with the survey. People can't
Yes.
select more. Are you aware of it? Okay.
Yeah, we're working on it already.
All right, perfect. Thank you.
Thanks
so
everyone.
much. Thank you. Have a great day. Stay safe.
Thank you. Bye for now.